All right, it's time to get started here on this week's Panther-Lair Show podcast, of course, live, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You listen to the podcast through the week. We highly recommend that you check in on Tuesday nights as we go live every Tuesday night at 8:30 to talk a little Pitt sports, a little Pitt football, a little Pitt basketball, a little Pitt recruiting, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. And we'll give it a few minutes here as everyone files in. It's a busy Tuesday night. I understand that. There's a lot going on in the world. Presidential debate tonight. And we appreciate you checking out the live stream of the podcast as long as you are so inclined. And look, I think there's plenty to talk about as far as Pitt goes. And certainly if you're listening to the podcast through the week, you don't care. The presidential debate's not going to interfere with that. But like I say, I appreciate everybody who's tuning in. I always like to do these live streams. I think the fun thing about it is not that I've taken away any safety net of being able to pause and go back and re-record when I say something stupid. That's not the fun part. The fun part is that we get to have this little conversation where you can get in the chat screen here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can get in the chat during the live stream and we can have a conversation. I say something you want to respond to. You have a question about something. You can throw it there in the chat, and we'll get to it. We'll have a little back and forth, and sometimes I'll talk for a while, and then we'll get over to the questions. So if you have questions, you can start pouring them into the chat screen now. And if you're listening to the podcast later in the week, you didn't get a chance to ask questions. So maybe next Tuesday night at 8:30, you should come over to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and we'll be talking about Pitt's game against NC State, and we'll be discussing whether that worked out well for the Panthers, and we'll get your thoughts on it as well. You should know the website by now, Panther-Lair.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, pittsburgh.rivals.com. We cover football, basketball, and recruiting, all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where, I say we have this back and forth on Tuesday nights during the podcast. We have these interactions and conversations. That's what the message boards are like all day, every day throughout the week. You just get to think about what you want to say before you push enter, as opposed to me just spewing it out and hoping that it comes out sounding somewhat coherent. Get a chance to revise it. But we have conversations all day long, and all the topics that I talk about here on the podcast, or I talk about on the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m., it all comes from the message boards and the topics that we're talking about there. And some of those topics are conversations that I bring up and threads that I start, and a lot of them are conversations and threads that come from other people that I get in on the conversation because it's a good thing to talk about. Be like, I hadn't thought about that. That's an interesting point you bring up. Is Phil Campbell, is his job in jeopardy with the surging performance of Servassier Dennis, who's become really one of the breakout players to emerge from this defense so far this season? Well, that's a conversation that someone else brought up, and I don't necessarily agree with the premise. I think Phil Campbell is safe, but it's an interesting conversation to have, and it's something we can talk about here on the podcast. It originated on the message boards, and so that's the place to be. If you are a Pitt fan, and I think there are a lot of great places online to have Pitt conversations. I think they're all over the place. You can find good Pitt conversation, but I think we have the best online community of Pitt fans. We're on the premium message boards at Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you go and check that out. Quick shout out, of course, as always, to Home Field Apparel. They make great college sports, college-themed shirts, and it's just really high-quality T-shirts and sweatshirts and other apparel, and just great logos, great branding. I think they did a great job with their Pitt collection, and it was super, hugely popular with Pitt fans, and you can see that with the reaction that they got when they launched that Pitt collection a month or two ago. Go to homefieldapparel.com. You can get a great, there are great Pitt shirts there. And obviously, we've got the slideshow going tonight with the Steel Panther look from that game against Louisville. And, you can go to a number of places and get that gear, or you can get, authentic team replica jerseys or things in the Pitt colors. But you got to go to places like Home Field Apparel to get something truly unique. It's not exactly what you're going to find in the team's store, but it's still authentic to Pitt. And if you're a Pitt fan, you'll appreciate some of the designs they have. So I highly recommend going to check it out, homefieldapparel.com. Of course, as we sit here on a Tuesday night, we should have something to drink, right? So I got another Arcs This is not any kind of partnership or anything like that. I just wanted to have a beer tonight. Arcs, they're over on 65. It's a gluten-free brewery. Doctors told me I should cut that stuff out of my diet, so I'm into it. That's good. That's their light lager. That's a pretty tasty little beverage. We had the pumpkin one a few weeks ago. If you're looking for something a little bit different, if you want to try a different sort of dietary plan, you want to cut gluten out of your diet, or you just want to try a new, or I shouldn't say new, they've been around for a few years, but a different brewery in Pittsburgh that's taking a different approach to things. Arcs, it's all gluten-free. It's over on 65. This is their light lager. Their pumpkin was really good. This is really good. They have a good hazy IPA. I mean, they have good beers, and this is brewed with millet and quinoa. Something a little different. You can give it a try. And this isn't a partnership or anything like that. This is just me wanting a beer, but not really, not supposed to have gluten. So I'll go and get some of these. It's a nice break from the White Claws and Trulies. The weather is turning. You can't drink those fruity seltzers all winter long. That's what they keep telling me. I might still do it. But I'm also going to enjoy beer because I still want to drink beer, and Arcs is a place to go. So let's dive into, you get to this point in the season. You start going week to week in the season. You certainly want to talk about the last game that happened. And you want to talk about the specifics of the last time you saw the team in action and what you saw out there and who stood out and who made plays and what were the turning points and what were the questionable decisions and all those things that we sort of Monday morning quarterback about a game for basically the whole week until the next game comes. And that's part of sports, sports talk. It's part of sports fandom. It's part of sports media. We break down a game, and it's Tuesday. The game was on Saturday. Pitt's win over Louisville. Although Craig Meyer from the Post-Gazette, who spent a considerable amount of time in Louisville, I think tweeted that people from Louisville get mad when you say Louisville. Quite frankly, I don't care. I'm going to say it however it comes out of my mouth, Louisville. But I guess I'll try to say Louisville. So Pitt gets the 23-20 win over Louisville, and there's a lot to analyze from that. Even though we're 3 days later, there's a lot to talk about in that game. There are key plays and key players and key moments and, like I said, key decisions. But when you're in the midst of season 2, though, you're not just talking about game specifics. Sometimes there's something so notable that, yeah, you are. You're talking about the Pitt special play. You're talking about the field goal against Penn State. You're talking about, running the ball to try and run out the clock against Miami. You're talking about some of these specific plays. You dwell on them. But you also, at least I find myself often looking at the big picture. And particularly early in a season, 3 games in, let's say, I'm looking at where is the team right now? Where are they strong? Where are they weak? What's going to help them succeed? And what's going to hold them back? What trends have emerged in that regard? What have we seen from this team to make you think that they're going to win a bunch? And what have we seen from this team to make you think that they're going to struggle? And it's not real complicated. I don't think I'm about to drop any hot takes here. Obviously, the defense is really good. And obviously, the offense is not at the level it needs to be. And I think there are a lot of things that bother people about that. Mostly, I would say, I think the thing that bothers people the most, because it certainly sticks out to me the most, is how much when you watch this offense, this 2020 Pitt offense, it looks a lot like 2019 Pitt offense. And the 2019 Pitt offense turned what should have been a 9 or 10 win season into an 8-win season. 7 in the regular season. That was a team that should not have only won 7 games in the regular season. That was a team that wasted multiple opportunities. 2 very much wasted opportunities in the Miami and Boston College games. And at least 2 others, I would say, in the Virginia and Virginia Tech games where the offense just gave them no chance whatsoever. The defense did not play perfect in those games, but the defense was not the cause of, the defense did not deserve the blame in those games. The defense held Penn State to 17 points. And I won't even, I'll let that one go. That was a tough game. The offense did not do enough to win. Obviously, I think the defense, if you hold an opponent under 20 points, you've done enough to win. And I will give the defense credit for that. But I would the Virginia and Virginia Tech games were games that Pitt conceivably could have won. Virginia and Virginia Tech were not that much better than Pitt last year. Pitt's offense was just that much worse than Virginia and Virginia Tech. And this is semantics, and this is splitting hairs, and maybe this is, losers' rationale. But Pitt's offense was the worst unit on the field in those two games. And that's why those games went the direction that they did. And that's why it's concerning to look at this year, because I just named two definite games and two possible games. Say you split the difference on that. That's 3 losses that should have been wins. And that turns a 7-5 regular season into 10-2. How different are things this past offseason? How different are we looking at Pitt? How different are we looking at Pat Narduzzi if that team goes 10-2 in the regular season? But it didn't go 10-2 because the offense let them down. And this is what we've talked about all offseason. And I will be the first to admit that I've spent the last 10 minutes of this podcast, maybe a little less because, I talked about some other things to open the show. But I've, since we started talking about Pitt football specifically, I have been basically rehashing things that I've been saying for the last 9 months and longer into the regular season, the end of the regular season. But certainly throughout the offseason, I've said all of these things, and I realize that I'm rehashing them, but I'm rehashing them because we're seeing the same problems. This is the issue right now, is that this offense does not look any better than it did a year ago. Let's put a finer point upon it. This offense is not executing any better than it did a year ago, because I do believe, and I said this last week, and I wrote it in the 3-2-1 column, and I said it on the Panthers Insider Show, and I said it on the podcast last week. I do believe the players are better this year. I believe that Jordan Addison is an upgrade to the receiving corps. I believe that, a second-year Vincent Davis and a freshman Izzy Abanikanda and a second-year Daniel Carter, if he's healthy and if he can get in the mix, I believe that is an upgrade to the running back corps. Comparing year to year, I believe this offense has better personnel than it did a year ago, almost at every position. Almost. And it's not executing any better than it did. And we can sit here and talk about Mark Whipple, and we can sit here and talk about second half adjustments, and we can sit here and talk about play calling and play design and game planning and all that stuff. And you and I can put everything we know about the second half adjustments Pitt did or did not make, and everything we know about Mark Whipple's game plans and his play calling and his play designs. You and I could put the whole wealth of our knowledge on those topics in one hand, and we can what in the other, and I'll tell you which one is getting filled faster. I don't know what kind of second half adjustments Pitt could make. I know that their offense doesn't score very well in the second half, but newsflash, they don't score very well in the first half either. They are not a good offense. They are not executing well right now. And they did not execute well last year. People want to talk about, their offense just went in a hole last season. They just stunk. Yeah, they did in the second half. They're talking about in the second half of games, they were just a bad second half offense. They were a bad second half offense, but they were also a bad first half offense. They were not good before halftime, and they were not good after halftime. They lost games because they were bad for 60 minutes. The only thing they did consistently for 60 minutes was fail to execute on a consistent basis. And we're seeing those things again. And I think there are a lot of, and look, I didn't say all that to let Mark Whipple off the hook. He's the man responsible for this offense. I think there were some things in 2018 that were out of Sean Watson's control, but he was ultimately responsible for the offense. And I think some of the things that were out of his control, some of the things that held his offense back in 2018, and I'm talking about personnel and execution, carried over to 2019. And that's why last year's offense, while it had a far more productive passing game, it wasn't really all that much more efficient or that much more effective. And in some ways, you can look at some stats and find areas where the passing game, in particular, and the offense overall, took a step back from where it was in 2018. Because you've got some personnel issues and you've got some execution issues. And the execution is a big problem because we can talk until we're blue in the face about second half adjustments, and we can talk about game planning and play calling. But if you're not executing the plays, you're not going to score points. And if you don't score points, connect the dots, you're going to lose games. Now, again, it ultimately falls on Mark Whipple to have those players prepared to execute. It ultimately falls on that whole offensive coaching staff to have the team ready, to have the offensive players ready to execute when they go on the field. And it falls on Mark Whipple to have the plays available and call the plays that the players can execute. And then you really go all the way up the ladder, and it falls on Pat Narduzzi to demand that level of effective coaching out of his staff. But when they walk out on the field and they say, hut, hut, hike, you have to do your job. You have to be right in what you're doing. And that's the obvious stuff, like if the ball hits you in the hands, you have to catch it. If you're not supposed to move before the third hut, then you don't move before the third hut. If you're supposed to be on the line of scrimmage, you get on the line of scrimmage. If you're supposed to be off, you stay off. That's the basic stuff. If you're running with the football, you make sure you're not going to lose that football. That's the basic stuff. But then the more complicated things that coaches will look at and say, look, this one guy here took a bad step and that blew up the whole play. And that happens far too much with this offense. Over and over and over again. And it holds back the running game and it holds back the passing game. And if they can't figure out a way to execute better, they're going to run the risk of having the same thing happen to them that happened last year. And maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe they'll stumble their way through the season averaging 22 points a game and they'll win 9 games, 10 games because their defense will just be that awesome and opponents will just struggle against them. And every now and then they'll get lucky and have a 27-point game and they'll win a game 27-24. But if you keep playing Louisville 23-20, you keep letting Syracuse hang around 21-10, it's going to bite you. Just like it did against Miami and just like it did against Boston College. And if I'm the coaches, I'm hammering those 2 games into these kids' heads all the time. Or at least I spent all offseason hammering it into their heads and saying, look what happens when you don't play with the level of focus you need to have. This is what happens. You guys are an average 8-5 team. You should have been no worse than 10 wins on the season. 9 in the regular season. No reason you should have lost to Miami. No reason you should have lost to Boston College. And again, not letting the coaches off the hook here. Coaches are ultimately responsible for having the team ready to play. The players have to execute. And it's hard to go to specific guys and say, man, Bryce Hargrove, that guy is just blowing it. Snap after snap after snap. Or, the right tackle spot, major weakness, blowing it, snap after snap. You can pick on the tight ends a little bit, or at least you could last year. This year they haven't been able to string together 2 consistent games out of the same guys at tight end all year. Lucas Kroll doesn't play in the opener. He plays in the second game and makes 1 good catch and drops 1 bad catch. Gets hurt, doesn't play in the Louisville game. So Daniel Marega becomes the number 1 guy in the Louisville game. It's been so inconsistent there. And I actually think Marega is kind of interesting. I think he's a guy who could make plays. He almost had a one-handed catch that, Pat Narduzzi said it this week. I think he said it at his Monday press conference. I thought he was going to come down with it too. I was like, well, that's like some Odell Beckham stuff out there, but he didn't catch it. So, it's Odell Beckham Browns stuff, not Odell Beckham Giants stuff. He needs more Giants than Browns, but don't we all? So it's hard to single out one player or one position group. But when you're talking about offense, and we are, you got to talk about the quarterback. And I'm the type that, I think Kenny Pickett is good enough. And I think that's what I've said. That's been my sort of consistent opinion for the last 2 years or so. Coming out of the Miami game in 2017, wow, amazing, lots of hype. Holy cow, this guy's going to be awesome. 2018, they run the ball for 3,000 yards or whatever it was. They have 2,000-yard rushers. Okay, just wait. Pickett as a junior, he's going to be great. Throws the ball a million times. Leaves a lot of question marks, I think. But was good enough to do it, though. Looked good enough to get the team to 8 or 9 or 10 wins. Now, he's a senior. Now he's a third-year starter. Now there has to be a step forward. And he's been hurt by drops, and he's been hurt by lackluster pass protection. But this year, there have been a few drops, no question. I think the pass protection's been okay. I think the pass protection's been good enough that you should be better than Pickett has been. And I think what troubled me on Saturday in the game against Louisville, what troubled me on Saturday is there were too many instances where Pickett dropped back. He drops back to pass. And look, we got a picture of him on the screen right now. Drops back to pass, and all of a sudden the ball comes down, and he's moving. He's shuffling around. And sometimes the pressure was there. Sometimes the pocket was collapsing. Sometimes it wasn't, though. Sometimes the pocket, it shrunk a little bit, but there's room to stand up in that pocket and find your open receivers. I don't know. I don't know how you put your finger on it. I don't know if you say it's about pocket presence, composure, feeling the rush, standing tall in the pocket, seeing the field. There's a lot of those sort of quarterback cliches that people will throw around. Whatever it is. And I felt this last year, and I think I said it at various points last year, and probably even a little bit during 2018, although it was so hard to judge because they didn't throw the ball very much. But certainly last year, and I'm seeing it again this year, just not the presence in the pocket that you need to have. You've got guys to throw to. This team, as much as any team I've seen under Pat Narduzzi, has talented weapons at the skill positions. The lone exception would be 2015 when they had Tyler Boyd, and for like half a game they had James Conner. I would say the receiving core in 2015 was better than this year's receiving core simply because it had Tyler Boyd. But this year, when you've got Jordan Addison, and they brought Taysier Mack back, he made his first appearance against Louisville and played well. Had the really heads up play to get tackled on a fourth down, I think, wasn't it? And stays up, doesn't touch the ground, and runs 40 yards for a touchdown. I mean, that was a great play. Look at this timing. There he is right there on the screen. If you're watching the live stream, you're seeing a picture of the play I'm talking about as I talk about it. That is synergy, and I didn't even make that happen. I'm not trying to control the slideshow as we talk here, but I think this receiving core is talented enough. There are years, there were a few seasons in the past couple of years where I don't think you would have said that. I think this year I would say that. I would say that about Jordan Addison. I would say that about Taysier Mack. I would say that about Jared Wayne. I would say that about Shockey Jacques-Louis. I would say that about DJ Turner, who I'm glad I talked him up last week because he certainly had a bad game on Saturday. Bad game may be strong, but he dropped at least one pass he definitely should have caught, and probably two. So I shouldn't say he had a bad game, but he entered the Louisville game having caught all 7 of the passes thrown to him this season. He was 7 for 7 targets to receptions, and then he goes out in the Louisville game and has a drop or two and doesn't quite look as good. But in terms of filling out your receiver rotation, if you have those guys, you have Mack, Addison, Jacques-Louis, Wayne, and Turner. That's a pretty strong 5. Trey Tipton got back in the mix last week as your number 6 receiver. Jalen Barton, we didn't even see. I think he got a little banged up in the Syracuse game. But as your number 7, a freshman with that kind of speed, I'll take those 7 receivers, and I think you've got a pretty talented receiving core. There are guys to throw to. I think Lucas Kroll, when he's healthy, is a receiving target. I think Daniel Marega has the potential to be a pretty good receiving target out of the tight end position. There are players to throw to. And Mark Whipple's been around a long time. He can design plays that get guys open. You look at what he did with guys like Andy Isabella and Adam Brenneman at UMass. He got them the ball. And Tajay Sharp before that. Everybody knew the ball was going to them, those guys, and he still got them the ball. He got them open for receptions, for a ton of receptions, 90, 100 catches in a year. He can design those kinds of offenses. And they don't all have to just be screens and short passes and quick passes. He can design offenses to get Jordan Addison open, to get Taysier Mack open, and Wayne and Jacques-Louis and these guys. But your quarterback has to be able to stand tall in the pocket, has to feel the pressure, has to sense when the pocket is collapsing, but he still has time. And that part of Kenny Pickett's game just it hasn't seemed to have gotten better. Maybe it has. And maybe he would sit here and say, "What are you, an idiot? Look at my tape when I was a sophomore. I was all over the place. I was crazy and skittish. And, thank God we had Olsen and Hall, or else I would have been, it would have been a miserable year. Those guys were the reason we won the ACC and all this stuff." That's fine. But to my eye, he's got to get better. And this is not a bash Kenny Pickett thing, but I think he can do better in his position. Everybody on the offense can do better. I think Pickett can make some leaps. He's got room to grow, an improvement that he can make, that if he could make it, I think would help this offense a lot. And they need it, right? I mean, I think if you listen to the Drive Home podcast on Saturday after the Louisville game, it's always one of the more fun things we do, and it gets, pretty good reaction from people and pretty good response, and people tend to check it out a lot. Driving home from the game, I'll just bust out my phone and turn on the recorder and just talk, half hour, just sort of instant reactions to the game. I'll record it like an hour or 2 hours after the game, so I've had a little bit of time to process and digest the game a bit. But it's not quite stream of conscious, but it's somewhat close to that, and it's fun, and it's just sort of instant reactions, immediate reactions that day to the game, and it's an enjoyable podcast to do. But there was a question I asked on that podcast, and I said this is going to be the question of the week. This is the big question that I'm going to be wondering about all week, and I'm going to be addressing all week. And we're here on this podcast. I'm going to write about it in the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com on Friday. Probably talk about it on the Panthers Insider Show on Saturday. And the question is this: in 2020. Can you win a championship with defense? Can you win a championship as a defensive team? And I don't know what the answer is to that. Because I look back and, of teams that, won at least 9 games in the last 5 seasons, I think there's only been 2 that averaged less than 23 points per game. And I mean, that's where, so Pitt overall in the season right now, I think he's averaging 33. But that includes that Austin Peay game. We're not going to take that out. Those stats count. Those points count. But if you look at the Syracuse and Louisville games, they're averaging 22 points per game, right? 21, 23. They're averaging 22. If their season average keeps coming down with games like that and eventually levels out around that 21, 22, 23 area, that doesn't bode well for their chances of getting, to a high win total. Like I say, over the last 5 seasons, there have only been 2 teams that have been able to win at least 9 games while averaging less than 23 points per game. You want to know who they were? I will tell you. Northwestern in 2015 went 10-3. They averaged 19.5 points per game. That seems impossible. Their defense was really good. They were number 12 in the nation. They gave up 18.6 points per game. So, not even a point separation. It was weird though. Northwestern got blown out in a bunch of games, but then blew out teams in a bunch of games. But it was like they either scored a ton and gave up nothing, or scored nothing and gave up a ton. So they were, were they a great defensive team? They finished 12th in the country in scoring defense, but it was a weird up and down year, but they ended up with 10 wins. So it's a pretty good season for Northwestern. And then the other one was last year. San Diego State went 10-3. They averaged 21.2 points per game on offense, which is what Pitt averaged last year. But they are the number 2 defense in the nation. They gave up less than 13 points per game. And if you're going to average less than 23, if you're going to only average 22 points per game or 21 points per game or something like that, you need to be top 5 defensively, or else it's not going to work. You need to be like San Diego State last year, averaging 12.7 points per game allowed. That's what you need to be. And now this brings up this question, which leads into another point, another thought I've been having in the past few days. Can this Pitt defense be that good? Can they hold teams on average to 2 touchdowns or less per game? It's a lofty challenge. Right now they're averaging 10 points per game allowed? And, they're putting up numbers that are consistent with being the number one defense in the country. Can they sustain at that level all season long? I'm actually not going to bet against them. I don't know if they'll finish as the number one defense in the country. I'm not betting against them being number one in the ACC, top 10 nationally, and potentially top 5. I think they really are that good. But here's the damn rub, folks. They are that good. They are what I would call, really without hesitation, a championship level defense. Which means if you just had an offense with a pulse, you can add those two together, right? An offense just with a pulse, plus a championship level defense, you have a pretty good chance of getting yourself a championship. Now, I don't know, I'm not going to get into college football playoffs, but if you had an offense with a pulse, and I'm talking an offense that could have a balanced attack, average somewhere around 30 points per game, with this defense, you would get to Charlotte. And when you got there, you would give Clemson a game. It would not be some kind of 28.5 point spread. It wouldn't be like that when you went to Clemson in the regular season finale for Pitt. And it wouldn't be like that when you met them again 2 weeks later in Charlotte or 3 weeks later, whenever the date of the ACC championship game is. And that is going to be one of the great frustrations of 2020 if this offense does not figure it out. If they don't get their stuff together, if they can't figure it out, and they end up costing this team games this season when they've got a defense that plays as well as this one does, this is going to be one of the great missed opportunities in Pitt history. And I don't mean to delve into hyperbole. It's only 3 games. We shouldn't go crazy. But this defense is operating at a really high level. I mean, really high level right now. Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver are playing like NFL high draft picks right now. Those two guys. The linebacker core has come along really outstanding. Even when they lost Wendell Davis, who looks like he's going to be out for a little while. He was on crutches with a brace on his leg for the Louisville game. Chase Pine stepped in, and I thought he played fine. And those outside linebackers are no joke. Cam Bright and Phil Campbell and Servassier Dennis, those guys are really good. Been really impressed with the corners, Jason Pinnock and Marquez Williams. I think Marquez Williams has been one of the breakout stars this year. Obviously he had an interception last week, but just week to week he's been really consistent. Week to week, I'm talking about the last 2 games. He's been really consistent against offenses that are trying to challenge and throw. And then your safeties, of course. DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford. Front to back, this defense is outstanding, and they were dominant against Louisville. A really good offense. Maybe the best offense they've faced since Carolina last year. This was a really good Louisville offense. And Pitt controlled them. They dominated them. They had a bust on a 75-yard touchdown run. And then they gave up a touchdown pass after Pitt's offense fumbled the ball and put Louisville in good field position. Bad field position for Pitt's defense. They didn't give up much. They didn't give up much at all. They controlled the game. It'll be, like I say, it'll be one of the great missed opportunities if this offense is not able to capitalize on the defense that they're playing with. And, that happened to a large extent last year, and it'll be even worse this year because this defense looks even better. This defense looks like it's even more dominant. You lost Jalen Twyman. You added Rashad Weaver. And Rashad Weaver looks like he hasn't lost a step. He actually looks even better than he was a year ago. All right, let's jump into some of the comments and questions here. See what's going on the YouTube chat. Let's see here. Leon Moore 23 starting off with the most important conversations. Says, tell me Nike will appeal that horrible decision. Any info on why was he denied? Unreal. Sorry, Leon, I didn't make a joke about that. I didn't mean to make a joke about that. I thought you were talking about Nike with the Steel Panther uniforms, a horrible decision on the uniforms. He's talking about Nike Sabande, the Pitt guard who transferred from Miami of Ohio, who's not ruled eligible by the NCAA, didn't get a waiver to be eligible this year. Look, we're at a point right now where it's a shock when the NCAA doesn't rule a guy eligible to play right away. And I was shocked that they didn't rule Nike Sabande eligible to play right away. I was shocked by that. I can't explain why they made that decision. I've given up trying to understand why the NCAA makes their decisions. I don't understand half of the guys who are ruled eligible. I don't understand half of the guys who are ruled ineligible, and probably more than half in both cases. I don't understand what the logic and the rationale is, and none of this stuff is made public, and so the NCAA just ends up looking bad. Time after time after time, whether they make a decision in favor of the kid or against the kid, they look bad because there appears to be no consistency and there's no transparency whatsoever in this process. So you don't know why this guy was ruled eligible and this guy wasn't. It doesn't. You don't understand it, and you can't understand it, and it's frustrating to watch. And Pitt will appeal the decision, and hopefully they get lucky. But I don't understand. So maybe they'll have to wait another year to get him on the court. Matt Sable asks, are there going to be fans this week? I have no idea, Matt. I really don't know. I mean, it's a decision for the government to make. I'm tired of seeing about it on Twitter. Sure. Do I think you could put every player's parents and every coach's family in a stadium of 68,000 and have them spread out by at least 6 feet? Yeah, I do. You probably could pull that off as a baseline. Could you fit 15,000 people into a 68,000 foot stadium and have 6 feet in between every person? Yeah, probably. You probably could. My question, and I'm sure Pitt has the logistics figured out on this, but it's one thing that I always wonder about. You have to get 15,000 people into the stadium, and you have to get 15,000 people out of the stadium, and you have to get those 15,000 people to stay 6 feet apart from each other throughout the game. Those are things that I think are going to be more challenging, than just, I can put 15,000 people in here with 6 feet in between them. But But as to your question, Matt, I have no idea if they're going to have fans this week or not. Jason Martell, did Kai Wright leave the Syracuse game with an injury? I can't recall. Was he on the sidelines for Louisville? I don't remember Kai Wright getting hurt in the Syracuse game, but he definitely was not suited up for the Louisville game. He was at the game. He was on the sidelines. He was not in uniform. So, yeah, he was hurt, and that took him out and left Pitt really with 3 scholarship tight ends. Grant Kerrigan, Daniel Marega, and Kmar Mims. Mims didn't play at all. Marega played the bulk of the snaps. Kerrigan basically was an extra offensive tackle, which they later used Carson Van Lin in a similar role. But, yeah, I mean, Marega, as long as Kroll is out, Marega's probably going to be the guy. It'd be interesting to see what they do if Kai Wright is available, if they use both of those guys, if they rotate them, or if one is the clear, number one tight end ahead of the other. So, Matt Durney says, Marquez Williams, great hands on the interception. Obviously, the cornerbacks are helped greatly from the defensive line play, but how would you rate them so far this year? I think Pinnock and Williams have been good. They haven't gotten beat too much. They haven't given up a lot of plays downfield. They're getting a lot of help up front, of course. It's a lot harder to take shots downfield and throw those passes when the defensive line is getting to the quarterback and putting pressure on those guys and making, not giving them time to set those plays up. But, I think Pinnock and Williams have played really well. And that was a big question mark coming into this. I mean, we talked all summer about the depth at cornerback and how Pitt was going to be thin. And they were going to have Damari Mathis and Jason Pinnock, and then a lot of question marks behind them. And who are they going to rotate in? And how are they going to get those guys snaps? And then what were they going to do next year when Pinnock and Mathis are gone? Well, then Damari Mathis gets hurt in August, and then it's a question of who's going to start opposite him. And I kind of thought it would be Marquez Williams. And then A.J. Woods got the start against Austin Peay and played more snaps than any other player on defense in that game. But then these last 2 weeks, Woods has only played about 4 or 5 snaps total between the two games, and Marquez Williams has been the starter, and I think played really well. He's been really short in his tackling. He got his first career interception this past week. And also, that was something else I wanted to bring up. Let me find. Yeah. 3 games this season, and Pitt's defense has 8 turnovers, 6 interceptions, and 2 fumbles. Last year, 13 games, all season long, 14 turnovers, 9 interceptions, and 5 fumbles. So 14 turnovers last year, 8 so far this season. That's a big difference. And I wrote something over the summer, and I probably talked about it here on the podcast. I don't remember. I have so many different topics I cycle through during an off season. But I looked up, defenses last year and the teams that led the country in sacks and how many turnovers they ended up with. And Pitt was the outlier with only 14 turnovers. Nobody else had less than 20. Nobody else with more than 40 sacks, or maybe even more than 38. Pitt had 51 sacks. And I think nobody else with more than 38 or something like that had fewer than 20 or 18 sacks or turnovers or something like that. Pitt was the considerable outlier, despite having more sacks than anybody else. And I said, there has to be some sort of positive regression here, because it doesn't make sense. If you can get pressure on the quarterback like that, you should be forcing more errant throws. You should be forcing more bad decisions. You should be getting more opportunities for interceptions, and you should be stripping the ball more and getting more fumbles. It doesn't make sense that you could get to the quarterback that often and create that kind of pressure and get those kind of sacks without getting sort of a not an equal number, but a representative number of turnovers. And so I said there has to be some sort of regression. Well, we're getting it this year. I mean, they lead the nation in sacks with 17, and they've also got 8 forced turnovers. So it's balancing out a little bit more than it did last year, and balancing out the way it should. If you're going to get after the quarterback the way Pitt does, you should be getting the ball and getting turnovers and takeaways, which they have been. And, the corners have been huge. Pinnock's got one, and Williams has one. Paris Ford has a couple. Damar Hamlin's got one. I mean, those guys are making plays in the defensive backfield, and they're getting a lot of help. I mean, it all works together. There are coverage sacks where it's covered so well downfield, and defensive line can't help but get there because they have tons of time. And then the flip side, there are rushed errant passes like the interception that ended the game last week, where Malik Cunningham got hurt, but thankfully, seems to be okay. He was under pressure. He was getting dragged down by Kalijah Cansey, and he throws the interception to Jason Pinnock. Just terrible throw, and Pinnock makes a great play on it. So, that's definitely been a step in the right direction, and one of those improvements for this defense where when I said I think this defense is actually playing even better than it did last year, which would have been crazy to say in the offseason. I think we talked about it at different times about whether the defense would improve, and then when Jalen Twyman opts out and Dane Jackson's gone and Damari Mathis gets hurt, we said, they can't possibly be even as good as they were last year. Well, they're not. They're better. They're playing better. They're producing at a higher level so far through 3 games. But that's one of the ways, is those turnovers. That's a huge part of it for any defense, and this Pitt defense is definitely making the most of it and putting up some really impressive numbers. Let's see. Josh Newark says, Panarduzzi said this week that Phil Campbell's the unsung hero of the defense. Yeah, I think so too. I think he's played really well. I think those outside linebackers overall, like I said, have played really well and being just really just really strong. They're getting after the quarterback. They're making plays in the backfield. They're really solid in their tackling. They're covering. I mean, when we go back to 2016, let's say, where Pitt's defense was really bad and they really struggled, right? There were issues at all 3 levels of the defense. Juan Price was crazy up front, got a ton of sacks, but nobody else really got a pressure on the quarterback. The corners really couldn't cover the fade patterns. The corners struggled out there. Safeties, sort of the same. But one position we don't really talk about as much, and I think we did at the time, but not as much in retrospect, is the outside linebackers. I mean, they just didn't play well in 2016 and parts of 2017 and early in 2018. I mean, outside linebacker has not been a strength of this defense. But with Cam Bright and Phil Campbell, Servassier Dennis, I would say it's become a strength. Those guys are playing that well that I would call it a strength for sure. Let me see here. Ricky the Dragon Kayak. Hopefully the Steel Panther look goes the way of the Steel Mills. Even though Leon Moore, 23, replied, recruits and kids love those uniforms. I'm not a fan. I'll say this. I mean, the Steel Panther uniform, I actually said this on the Drive Home podcast after the game. I mean, I couldn't really read you couldn't read the names at all. I had trouble with the numbers, but I'm just getting old. I couldn't really see the logo on the side of the helmet from the press box. You probably couldn't either on TV, except for when they did a close up on the guys. But as a one-time alternate uniform, I thought it was fine. I would have done the numbers in yellow. I think that would have made them pop a little bit more. But any conversation we have about Pitt uniforms kind of starts and ends right here, okay? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I said it after they revealed the new uniforms last spring, when they came out with their new look. I said this on the Drive Home podcast. I say this anytime anybody asks me anything about Pitt uniforms, all right? 2016, 2017, 2018, the retro uniforms, the throwback uniforms, they were perfect. They were without flaw. Everything else is going to fall short of those uniforms. Whether it's a retro uniform or an alternate jersey or whatever you want to throw out there, if it's not that, then it's going to be no better than second place. And second place now probably is the current road uniforms, I would guess, followed by the home and then the Steel Panther look or whatever. But it doesn't matter because 1A and 1B or 1 and 1A, however you want to put it. No, actually, no. Number one is the road uniforms in the throwback road uniforms. 2016, 2017, 2018, like they wore at Virginia Tech in 2017 or at Penn State in 2017. That was the number one. Number two is the home version of those uniforms. Number three is probably the current road uniforms. Number four is the current home uniforms. Number five, whatever. It doesn't matter. Those were the perfect uniforms. Those still are the perfect uniforms. And it's, it was sort of funny when they unveiled the new look last spring, and then they had like the spring game a week later. And at the spring game, they wore those retro uniforms. And everybody could just see in stark contrast how much better they were than what they ended up coming out. And the current uniforms are fine. Came around on the font. It's fine. It's all, it's like those old uniforms, just updated a little bit. It's fine. They had the perfect uniforms. Period, point blank. It's as simple as it comes. They had the perfect uniforms. And they still do. They just chose not to, they choose to go a different direction. Let's see here. Dan Juby said, I thought the running back group made good progress this week. Any chance the Pitt offense has been vanilla or hiding things through the first few weeks? If they've been hiding things through the first few weeks, they should be fired. Those were important games. Syracuse, Louisville, those are important games. You need to go out and score. I hate the hiding things idea. They weren't doing and I don't think they were hiding anything. I'll say that. Okay, I should say just first, I don't think they were trying to hold back on the offense or save anything for NC State or Boston College or something like that. I don't think they were trying to hide anything. I don't think they were trying to hold anything back. I think you gain as much from opening up your playbook and trying to get into a rhythm with the things you want to do. I think you gain more from that than you do from holding things back that your opponent hasn't seen yet. I don't think they were hiding anything. As far as the running back group, though, I mean, Vincent Davis made some runs. I want to see Israel Abanikanda. I think a lot of fans are with that too. And Daniel Carter, if he could be healthy, I would like to see him on the field more. But I mean, I want to see the freshman Abanikanda out there getting more opportunities. I mean, I wrote it down. He had 9 carries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 carries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of his 9 carries gained at least 5 yards. He had an 8, a 7, an 8, a 5, and a 7. I mean, give that guy the ball. He is that mix, that middle ground between, the bigger back of A.J. Davis and the smaller, faster back of Vincent Davis. And he's kind of got the best of both of those guys. So give him the ball and get him out there and let him play. And I think that'll happen as time goes on. You know what I mean? I think it'll slowly progress. I think his involvement and his play, his snaps and his carries will go up as time goes on. It'll just be a little bit more time. I think it'll just take a few more games. Let's see. Oops, lost our questions here. Let's see. Durbert says, if the lack of execution continues, is it too late to deviate from the offense that was installed over the offseason? Just not clicking against ACAC opponents. I mean, your offense is your offense. You have what you you have what you do, and you're going to do it. And there are going to be tweaks every week. There are going to be new plays put in and old plays taken out. I mean, but you have your offense. I don't think you're going to scrap things. I mean, the biggest change I can remember seeing at midseason one year was 2014? Yeah, 2014. They won the first 3 games, and then they lost 3 in a row, like Akron, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. Or no, Akron, Iowa, and Virginia. And then they had an off week because they hosted Virginia Tech the following Thursday. And they came out against Virginia Tech the following Thursday, and that was the year Chad Wojtek was the starting quarterback. And I still remember, as clear as day, they're at Heinz Field. It's a Thursday night, and they come out, and on their first play, their first offensive snap, Chad Wojtek lines up in this shotgun. And I'm like, whoa. This is a Paul Christ offense, and they're in the shotgun on their first snap? And they ended up running I don't even know what you would call it. I mean, it was a spread quarterback run offense, and it was based on Wojtek's running ability, and it worked, and they ended up winning that game. And that was they needed every win they could get that year, because that was, lost to Duke at home, lost to Georgia Tech at home. Of course, they lost to Carolina. They always lost to Carolina, and they beat Miami in Miami to get bowl eligible. But anyway, that was the most drastic overhaul of an offense that I can remember seeing at midseason. They're not going to do that. They've got seniors, they've got upperclassmen on the offensive line and at quarterback. They're going to go with their offense. They just need, it needs to be cleaner. It needs to be crisper. These guys have to execute. And the coaches have to do better play designs and make better calls and have a better game plan. The players got to execute. The plays are there to be made, and the talent is there to make those plays. They have to get it done. They have to execute. Let's see here. What else do we got? Brock Madonic says, what are your thoughts on Daniel Morega and any updates of Lucas Krull and Wendell Davis? Are they out for the year or just week to week? As far as Krull and Davis, Pat Narduzzi said after the game on Saturday that neither guy was out for the year. I don't know if eventually that'll turn into those guys being out for the year. Narduzzi always says that he would, he'll make it public if a guy is out for the season. It certainly doesn't look good to have Krull and Davis miss those games. It doesn't look good to have DJ Turner change his number to 7, which is Krull's number. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that should be happening if a guy is expected back at a certain point in the season. But, according to Pat Narduzzi, they're not out yet. They're not done for the season yet. So we'll see, what comes of that for Davis and Krull. As for Daniel Morega, I don't know. Like I said, I'm intrigued. He had a nice catch to get a first down, and he almost had a great catch. A great one-handed catch, but he couldn't quite corral it. So I'd like to see him get some more snaps, and it'd be interesting to see what he's able to do as he settles into the offense more. And then if Kai Wright comes back and Lucas Krull comes back and he starts losing some of those snaps, maybe we won't see him as much. But I think he'll get at least another week as the number 1 tight end, and we'll see what he's able to do with it against NC State this week. C. Foster says, I've noticed your choices of beer over time, questionable picks. Thank you, C. Foster. Everybody has their own taste, right? I think the running game is being held back because of a lack of push from the offensive line. Yeah, this offensive line, I think it's playing better than it did a year ago. They're still not as good of a run-blocking offensive line as the group was in 2018, and they're probably not going to get there. I think they're better than they were, though. I still think these backs... Look, I think Vincent Davis, Israel Abanikanda, and Daniel Carter, when he's healthy, are above A.J. Davis and Todd Sibley in terms of ability, potential, ceiling, and really the impact they can make on this offense. And if everybody's healthy, I would ride it with those 3 guys and let the two fourth-year guys, A.J. Davis and Todd Sibley, kind of come in here and there, but I would not emphasize them. But not everybody's healthy right now. Going into this game, now, we'll see if Daniel Carter is going to be back. We'll see if A.J. Davis is going to be back because he got hurt in the Louisville game. But, going into this game, my plan, if I'm the coaches, is to, if I want to start Vincent Davis again, that's fine, but I'm going to get Abanikanda into the game early. I'm gonna let those two guys carry the load and see what they're able to do. That would be my approach, and I think that gives them the best chance to win. On to Green 19 says, when are you going to have a chance to interview Whipple and ask him why he can't coach his players and call plays well enough to be a competent offense? That's a great question. Really, the real question is, when are we going to be able to interview Mark Whipple? And the way it works is we get to talk to who Pitt gives us. So, and this is the way it's been with assistant coaches during the season, basically since Pat Narduzzi arrived, where you don't actually get to request coaches for interviews during the season. They'll pick 2 coaches each week, one from each side of the ball, and that's who you'll get to talk to. And they'll bring them out, and so I think each coach probably talks twice over the course of the season. I forget if Mark Whipple has talked yet this year during the regular season, but at some point Pitt will choose to bring him out, and then then we'll ask him then what's going on with the offense. Let's see here. Get a couple more questions before we roll it out. Leon Moore 23 says they need to throw deep, stretch the dang field. This will open things up, but for some reason they don't. Are they scared about Pickett interceptions? I mean, I think there's a lot of things that go into the decision to go deep or not go deep. I think they should do it too. And I talked about it on the podcast last week. I wrote about it in the 321 column last week. I put it in, I talked about it on the Panthers Insider Show. I said, I think they need to go deep. I think they need to attack. I think they need to try to take shots. I think they have the players to do it. I think they have a quarterback whose arm is strong enough, and they've got speed on the outside to stretch the field vertically. But they don't seem to do it. They took a shot on 4th and 4 in the Louisville game, and it was a decent pass. It really went right through Jordan Addison's hands. I mean, he had a chance. He was covered pretty well, but he could have gotten the ball, but he failed to do so. But they really didn't take a lot of deep shots, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm sure the coaches have an answer that they would not put out there publicly. I do think that if your quarterback drops back and the pocket gets a little bit slower and he gets jumpy, I don't know if you have time to set up those deep passes, right? I mean, if your quarterback is going to get jumpy as soon as the tackles take take another step backward, or the guards come back a little bit, I mean, sometimes you need to hang in the pocket. And Pickett is sort of this conundrum of a guy who, at times, I think he runs too much. In terms of running out of the pocket, and then at times I think he doesn't run enough, where he's got opportunities to make plays with his legs and he doesn't seem to take them. Kenny Pickett needs to, like I say, I think just that pocket presence, that composure needs to get better. He's got to have a better feel in the pocket. And I think that would open I think that would give some opportunities. If he could drop back, trust his protection, stand up tall, keep his composure, even when the pocket's starting to collapse a little bit, I think he would find some of those guys open downfield. Addison or Mack or Turner. But that's not happening right now. And I think that's probably a part of the reason they're not taking as many deep shots as I think we would all like to see them take. Let's see. A lot of questions. Everybody's talking about the offense. Like I said, this is what it's all about, is the offense right now. And, you've got, you've got winnable games coming up. You've got NC State. You've got Boston College coming up. And, is 5-0 a realistic possibility? I mean, it is. And it should be the expectation. Even with these offensive struggles, they should not lose to NC State. They should not lose to Boston College. They probably should find a little bit of a groove offensively against those teams. But they couldn't do it against Louisville, and Louisville's defense was pretty bad. Louisville's defense gave up a lot of big plays to Miami. Pitt, not so much. And we don't have any answers. We're at the end of our hour. We don't have any answers for Pitt's offense, but it's not our job to find those answers. It's our job to see if Pitt found those answers. So we'll find out next week. We'll find out on Saturday when they host NC State at Heinz Field. You can hear that game on 93.7 The Fan. Of course, earlier in the morning at 8 a.m., you've got the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. You can tune in then, and we can talk about the Pitt game and get ready for Pitt against NC State. In the meantime, go to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you can find it all. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, like I say, message boards. We can interact with lots of other Pitt fans and talk about this stuff heading up to the game, talk with other Pitt fans during the game, and talk with other Pitt fans after the game. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So go check that out. Stay tuned to the website. And, we'll get you all ready for the game. Lots of coverage during the game and after the game. It's the place that you want to be. Also, go to homefieldapparel.com to get your best Pitt gear, the coolest, most unique Pitt gear you're going to find. It's high-quality T-shirts and sweatshirts. Thanks for everybody who checked in on the live stream tonight. Really appreciate it. Glad to have the conversation. If I didn't get to your question, pop back in next week. We'll talk about it for sure. And thanks to everybody who listened to the podcast through the week. We'll be back next Tuesday night, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, 8:30 live stream every week. So if you didn't get it this week, come back again next week. And if you were here, we'll see you again. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll talk to you again next week.